I had been a corporate executive for 26 years, and since 2017, I was working with Generation Z. And I was very intrigued by work ethics, their innovation, their ideas. Who said, well, young kids can't do anything.
Do you believe Gen Z will lead the AI revolution?
They will lead the AI revolution. They'll be the conduit for AI development. A lot of them have probably got more entrepreneurial experience than many corporate leaders by doing their side hustles. But they just don't know how to convert these ideas in a corporate workspace.
So, would you please introduce yourself?
My name is Vijay Madhavan, Vijay for short, and I'm the founder of Always. It's an acronym that stands for Own Your Life, Your Zing. I lead a very niche-based, niche-focused consulting firm focused on multi-generational workforce capability, helping companies to accelerate the performance of their teams for sustainable, profitable growth.
What triggered your shift from corporate executive to researcher and Gen Z advocate?
So, Sam, it's an interesting question. Way back during the pandemic, I was very much thinking about my next pivot. I had been a corporate executive for 26 years, and since 2017, I was working with Generation Z. And I was very intrigued by their work ethics, their innovation, their ideas. But I also faced a lot of skepticism during that time from my peers who said, well, young kids can't do anything, right? Are they capable of delivering? And so the 6 months when I was taking a break from work, I was spending a lot of time with my daughter. And my daughter is a Gen Z. And one big question was sort of faced me, and it was a dilemma, in fact. What would the world be like when she entered the workforce? What opportunities would be there? How would she navigate some of these labels and the dynamics of the environment? This led me to then say, well, this is going to be the next space that we have to look at, because I recognize that 1 in 4 Gen Zs will be in employment in Asia Pacific, and it'll be 30% of the workforce across OECD by 2030. So this is a generation that will bridge the millennials, who will be the next set of senior leaders, and Generation Alpha, which is going to enter the workforce in 8 years' time. So I then dedicated myself to say, well, the old doors will not open new opportunities. There needs to be a fundamental shift at the corporate level, at the education level, even at a parenting level. And so I said, well, that's my mission. And it became my ikigai. And so I then set up the company to focus on Gen Zs, how they can integrate into multi-generational teams, how multi-generational teams can adapt to the unique styles and communication, kinks, as we call it, because they have very unique language, and to be able to sustain a business profitably with high performance. And at the same time, I then decided to build a practice through research, and therefore enrolled in my doctorate program, focusing on Gen Z. So that was the initial step. But then after my first year, with the advent and the rise of AI, I recognized that AI was going to be a powerful enabler in the next revolution at the workplace. So I delved into AI about 14 months ago, and I have had many aha moments where I know that teams will be really powered by AI. That's how I deep dive into research. So I use a lot of my research and my consulting work, and vice versa. And I've developed a number of interventions or solutions that are bespoke for my customers.
Why do leaders jump on AI without solving foundational issues first?
It's an interesting question, and this is a question that faces a lot of organizations, and they actually overlook this. Now, when we start a journey, we always have a destination. But when you look at corporate strategic planning processes, they'll come in, we'll take a KPI, we'll put the KPI there, and then we work it backwards. And business, as we all know it, begins and ends with people. But that's the last conversation that every corporate I've come across has. Is all about the financial numbers, is all about the operational models, but very little focus is given on what capabilities do we need to deliver these new goals and what have we got? So that's what I call in my Game Changer Manifesto, what I've got over what it takes. And more often than not, that conversation is left out or it's backfilled in most strategic plans. So when you look at AI, people will be a big part of implementing AI, right? So which parts of your process are you going to enable with AI? Who would be the people working on it? Do they have the capabilities? These are all tail end questions instead of forefront questions. So I then find that a lot of companies jump into AI because it's a shiny new object and they don't want to be left behind without really giving thought. What needs to change? Does our culture need to change? Does our operating model need to change? And if that needs to change, how do we start with our people first? Because people love change as long as it's within their comfort zone, right? So I think that's the dilemma that most companies overlook, I believe is innocently, or tend to avoid or kick the can down the road because they hope that, well, it will all fall in place. I think that's too big a chance to take and too big a risk.
Why call Gen Z unpolished gemstones rather than rough diamond?
Well, to me, when you consider a person a rough diamond, it means that you have to extract value out of them. Gen Zs are already very innovative. They're very creative from my experience working with them since 2017. They're curious, they're willing to learn, they're willing to experiment, they bring a lot of ideas. But what we need to do is to give them the platform where they can navigate conversations. So example here is that, we talk about AI and we expect Gen Z graduates to be AI fluent. But if we speak to Gen Zs, only 24% of them have received formal AI training. And schools spend too much time working on AI policing because they believe that AI prevents creative thinking. Now, I have an alternative view. Actually, if that only works powerfully if you know what right questions to ask. And for that, you need creative and critical thinking. So AI actually is a very strong platform to develop those skills. And the other thing is, they're very much digital natives on their phone from the moment they get up till the moment they get to sleep. And that's where they lose some of the social skills in communication and active listening. So you need to train them on that, understand that, their perspectives that vary from their chain of thought, they have blind spots. Help them to see blind spots not as criticism, but as a way to improve themselves. So I think it's more polishing by giving them the opportunities and the tools and giving them the mentorship, guidance, coaching. You can name it. There are a number of interventions, but I don't think they're rough diamonds. They are already quite polished. A lot of them have probably got more entrepreneurial experience than many corporate leaders by doing their side hustles, but they just don't know how to convert these ideas in a corporate workspace.
What should leaders unlearn to better engage today's workforce?
I think the most important thing is they have to relinquish control. This thing about our hierarchy is that the higher up, the more control you have. Yes, but in order for you to run teams today at speed, you need to relinquish some of that control. And you need to give staff, whether be it any generation, the empowerment to make decisions, to be held accountable, but provide them the appropriate safety nets so that when they fall, you are there to sort of cushion it, right? And then that becomes the learning, right? So failure fast, FFF, as so many people refer to it, but also learning from that failure quickly so that you develop new skills. So, but the challenge for leaders is how do they make time for it? Because there are 1 million agendas they deal with. So command and control seems to be the best way because they have a vision of the future. And, with all new leaders, particularly with new C-suite leaders, they're all out to prove themselves. But on hindsight, is there a need to? Because you did not become a C-suite by chance. You actually have enough battles cast to show your journey to a leadership role. So therefore, you should be using that to sort of guide and coach, know when to be in front of the flock and when to be herding it. And that means developing new skills of coaching, mentoring, providing feedback without bias. Well, that's easier said than done. But these are the new skills: empathy, active listening, not listening to respond, but listening to really understand.
Okay. What patterns do you see in companies trying to align culture and purpose?
So, purpose, I believe, now is the new currency. From my studies, Sam, I've seen a number of things, right? Especially post COVID. And it applies to even my generation as an X, the millennials and the Zs. Now, everyone now says, well, I want to work for a boss, I want to work for a company, but I like to see the alignment with my values and my goals. And they're becoming, staff are becoming skeptical, as are investors, with all these major pitch stories that we make or leaders sort of create and convey, but it's not carried through. So they're looking at, purpose. Purpose is not just, a slogan on a poster. It is embedded in everyday operations and decision making, even in development. People of today are willing to walk away from jobs, good paying jobs, if the purpose is not aligned. Another very interesting insight here is 2 years ago, I did a pilot study with Gen Zs across ASEAN around their perceptions on the employee value proposition. And one of the issues that came out was purpose. And Gen Zs don't just do research on a company, they also research on their line managers after their interview. They talk to their friends and say, well, I came across my new line manager. He interviewed me. What is he really like in real life, in the office? So they are also validating and doing far more due diligence on you as a line manager and a leader. And even if you put the best pay package out of them, if they don't see the alignment of leadership and purpose with their values, they're not going to take the job. They'd rather stay home. And that's because that is the cushion we have created, as Gen X, basically, to make sure that our children don't have to suffer the way that we have gone through. So we make it easy for them. So they know they have alternatives and they don't want to rush into a job, but they are doing their due diligence.
Okay. What's working and what's not working in an AI-led performance system?
So there's a lot of AI software there on performance management. And there are people who are saying, well, it helps you to do B, But I think there is a big part in AI, which as we see more AI agents and robots and processes coming through, there's two aspects. One is the ethical use of AI, and the other one is its explainability. No matter how you use AI, if we don't explain to the users how AI is actually working in providing fairness to performance objectives, minimizing bias, there will always be something to blame. So it is very important that those aspects are being explained. So there's a lot where we say, oh, we'll help you to do the bell curve. The bell curve is obsolete as far as I'm concerned. Even pay packages. Why should the increment of an employee be standard across the company? What can an employee who is really outperforming be given a larger chunk? And how do you explain that using AI, right? Because one of the things we all are subject to is recency bias in performance management. If a manager sits down with a staff, he's only going to remember everything that's happened recently. And then if it's positive, he'll say, hey, you've done a good job. But if it's negative, you say, well, you could have done better. But if you're having regular conversations and AI is recording these conversations, picking up key elements of achievements, but also development areas, providing them the immediate feedback and sort of nudging employees to work on their development areas, you can see a performance over a period of time. And then you can then help the manager that has, say, proof points or references to say, well, over the 12 months, this is how this employee is performing, and therefore deserves a particular rating, right? Because in my experience, every time we give a poor rating, the employee asks why, because they expect a high rating. But AI actually is a great tool to ensure that those events, learnings, or outperformance is captured and can help the managers give you a fair and objective view of how an employee has journeyed through the year in terms of their output, their value, right? And also their preparedness to do something bigger.
So, do you think, and this is a follow-up question, AI is unbiased?
Not really. We have this thing that we always talk about Gigo and Mimo, right? Garbage out, malice out. I think in a corporate level, your data is equally very powerful. If your data is not organized, then what you feed into your AI will produce what's fed into it. So I think companies, organizations need to start with looking at their data, understanding how the AI works, right? Which is the explainability part, where the ethical considerations are. It's never going to be fully 100% unbiased because it learns from its training, right? The data is trained and over time it improves. So what you feed into it is equally important. So if I've fed into, I've done a lot of regression tests using machine learning, deep learning for a lot of clients. And I've showed them that the entire area under the curve is so skewed because their data is so fragmented. So it is not unusual because when there's a change in leadership, they always want to have a new set of data to look at. So,
But isn't that somehow AI policing of the workforce?
yes, that is correct. So that is why you should not ignore old data. All data needs to be there, but you as a leadership team needs to then identify what is critical and what do we keep and making sure that we keep that. And everything else additional, yes, it's nice to have, if it is not critical, but you need to identify what your base critical information is. And it needs to be done collectively and not left to an individual leader to decide. I'll give you an example, Sam, and I've seen this with sales teams, right? That I've sort of, a new person comes in and they look at the sales funnel. And then all of a sudden, and they say, okay, our focus is to feed as many people at the top of the funnel, and we are focused only on the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel. And the process in between the funnel is completely then ignored. Because someone then decides, I want you to know how many people you're talking to and how much sales you make. You're not concerned about number of opening, how many presentations you've had, the kind of objections you're facing, how many closing interviews have you gone for, how many deals have you been able to secure, because all that tells you also the capability of a salesperson, right? So those critical aspects need to be determined, and no matter whether a leader wants it or not, you may be looking at two metrics. All the other elements of the critical structure of the sales funnel need to be captured and need to be organized. And I've seen that once that happens, the AI doesn't help because it's just two metrics. And how are we going to do an upsell campaign, a cross-sell campaign, identify which occupations or which segments of your client base will benefit from it. So, I mean, that's a classic example how I've seen where you're saying, well, you try to police your data and then AI gives you inadvertently police the AI as a consequence. So it's a consequence rather as a reason.
Let me ask you about something you mentioned to me before the interview. It's called simulation lab concept. So
Yeah, correct.
tell us about it and why now?
Well, the simulation lab concept is not new, but I just felt that over the years people have forgotten about this. And this is very much relating to what I've seen taking place in the education sector and the corporate sector. Now, I've attended a lot of conferences, I've spoken at a few. And last year I was at a conference where a CXO conference and an education conference were happening side by side. And the CXOs were saying, we're still missing the skills of the new entrants, the Gen Zs, into the workforce. They lack resilience, they lack creative thinking, they lack critical thinking. And then on the other hand, when I went across to speak at the education conference, the educators are thinking, oh, we've got corporate people as advisors on our board. We are aligned to what the corporates need. We are teaching them this, we are teaching them that, we're educating them, we're testing them on this. But then no one wants to accept the responsibility that this is shared. So, in one of the conversations I had with the education institution, I said, let's pilot this with the final year students, irregardless of faculty. Let's put them in positions of responsibility in a corporate sector, give them the tools, enable them with the financials, the hypothetical financials, give them the empowerment to make decisions and see where that goes. So it's a 5 day exercise, and every day is like a year, and we throw curveballs at them. And at the end of the day, they reflect, and then every day they reflect what they've learned, right? And then they realize that because all they see is the tip of the iceberg, they don't know what happens in an organization, how decisions are made on the go, and what the consequences are. So, yes, it does a few things. One, it gives them an insight, and they then prepare themselves better to step into a corporate environment. Second, they now know how the corporate environment works. And when they start talking about their value at interviews, they know how to position their value better, right? Sharp focus. They know where they can add value with AI, where, they'll try to understand that they have to manage not only downward, but they have to manage horizontally with their peers and also upward. So that improves their communication. But most importantly, it gets their critical thinking to another level. So the simulation labs that we already have AI. So every decision they put in, it automatically tells them top line number, impact to revenue, impact to employee morale, retention of their employees, right? What will happen to the stock price as a consequence, right? So, and then they have to use that data and go back to the board and do a 5 or 10 minute presentation, which allows them to improve their communication skill, how to communicate it up and down, concise. So I think it's right. It's quite an important juncture to bring it in, just in a different model or a different manner, unlike typical other simulation labs, because it helps our Gen Zs now come in and they're very clear, because everyone is ambitious. They say, I want to be a CEO in 5 years, but so you know what it takes. The simulation labs actually moderates that thinking and say, well, I now know what skills I need to acquire. And in fact, it helps the entrepreneurial journey. Because I would assume a lot of Gen Zs had a lot of side hustles, failed in the side hustles, but couldn't identify the learning from edge failure. And these labs help them. So that's why it is time for us to bring something back like that. But the biggest challenge I see there, Sam, is companies are willing to do this. But academics will say, well, probably in the West, it'll be easier. But in Asia, it's got to have certifications here, certification. It's got to be accredited. Otherwise, we won't take it on. That resistance needs to change, right? If you're talking about innovation is something that you don't need certification for. Innovation is what you rely on bringing all the knowledge you have and then applying it and then learning and refining those skills. So how do you then certify? It's like having a certificate for parenting. Just because I give you a certificate for parenting, does it make you an expert parent? It doesn't.
We are talking Gen Z, workforce, future of talent. Let's talk about them from, let's call it Xian to an Xian. I don't know if you heard that term, but I invented that term. Instead of saying calling us Generation X, let's call ourselves Xians. That's more cool, I think. So from an Xian to an Xian, what do you think about the idea that Gen Z are not the same all over the world? Is there a cultural impact on Gen Z? Is a Gen Z in the US is the same as Gen Z in Philippines?
Yes, you have to I think context and culture is a big element, right? Since I started researching Gen Zs, I've had the opportunity of speaking to Gen Zs across, although it's Asia mainly, but I've spoken to Gen Zs in the Middle East, I've also had engagements with Gen Zs through my daughter's friends in schools and former colleagues here in the US. So, what I've noticed is the cultural context plays a big part, right? The parenting styles obviously are key to it. The value system of Asian communities versus value system of the West. Those shape the Gen Zs, right? So a Gen Z in America may say, well, do I need a university degree to go out and get a job? Not necessarily. I'll do all these courses online and build up my skills, and then I'll go in, and then at the age of 18, I'll tell my parents, hey, I'm moving out. I want to go out. And the parents said, well, it's good. It's going to help you become more independent. Compare that to an Asian context where a university degree is seen as a golden ticket. Yes, you want to take all your courses, you're fine. But if you're not a lawyer, you're not an engineer, you're not an architect, you're not a doctor, these are things that, the Asian diaspora is still, sort of obsessed with, right? So kids will never give up the basis of completing their degree, even if they have opportunities to leave and do their own side hustles and learn skills, right? So the golden ticket is still there. Second is this concept of filial piety. You've not seen, in Asian context, we always have a huge respect for our parents, right? So we will always confer with them. We will stay with them. Our parents are not going to, let you move out of the age of 18. I said, no, you're still too young. You don't have the skills. They always see you as that young kid. Even if you're 40, they will still treat you like that young 15, 16-year-old. It's hard for them to let go because it is like a break of the chain of what we call generational command. So when we navigate conversations between, the Western Gen Zs, I find that I can have a very much open, direct, candid way of conveying my thoughts. And, it's a very nice discourse I have with Gen Zs. But when I get to Asia, I have to probe a little further. I have to say, okay, why do you feel that way? And where did you develop this? Is that your thought or you feel complying is the safest bet? So context. There is also the other context of the maturity of that community. So when I was in my corporate career, I was actually posted to Laos in my last posting before I stepped away from corporate life. So I found that because they had gone through a whole period of civil war, or they had difficulties after 1975 when the government was, overthrown by the communists, the royal families were overthrown. The younger people who were born at that point in time didn't have access to the infrastructure and education as their peers in other more advanced economies. So I went in and I saw millennials. They were actually acting like Axios. And, they didn't want to demonstrate anything about millennials, the Generation Y. And then you have the Gen Z. So there's a big cultural gap between the millennials and the Gen Zs because the millennials happen to behave like Axios. So, there is this context you have to consider. So it is different. And so navigating context is a very big concern, right? So whether be it a country, an organization, a community, you always begin with context first. And only when you understand the context, as I do with all my clients, I like to understand what their context. Where are they now? Where do they want to go? What's their operating culture? Only then can I sit down with them and say, okay, let's take these few steps. It also helps me to then say, well, this is how I communicate the need for change and what they're doing well at, right? So you're right, but that sort of sums up, there are different ways that Gen Zers behave in
Okay.
different contexts.
Give an advice to a 20-year-old who feels lost in the world of today.
Advice to a 20-year-old is, everything around you is a myth if you look for possibilities.
Okay. Quickly, do you believe Gen Z will lead the AI revolution?
They will lead the AI revolution. They'll be the conduit for AI development.
What you think a company of today should be doing differently for Gen Z talent in 30 seconds?
Well, they should be facilitating learning, unlearning, and relearning to stay relevant.
Okay. Corporate myth to bust.
The corporate myth that AI will replace people, No, it actually AI will show you who's capable.
Quick message to Gen Z.
Another person's opinion of you is not a reality. Your ideas are valid. Just keep staying curious.
Leadership practice to end.
The word feedback as a threat, I think it should be having conversations and insights and make it a shared responsibility.
What's the cost of ignoring purpose?
Becoming obsolete. That's when you lose purpose.
3 innovations from your lab you believe the Ixian isn't ready for.
Relinquishing control, understanding the difference between coaching and mentoring and directing, right? And understanding that as a leader, there is no longer a need to prove yourself.
3 innovations from your lab you believe Gen Z will benefit from.
Critical and creative thinking, right? Everything has a cost, and being accountable for it is the most important thing, right? No more blame game, but being able to stand up and really tell, an authentic story and becoming an authentic leader will be definitely a key takeaway.
Okay, from an Ixian father, what's the message we give to our Gen Z daughter?
Well, trust everything, but verify it.
Okay, finish this sentence. The future belongs to those who.
Remain curious.
Okay. Now, I will let you elaborate on this because this is how we will end this wonderful discussion. And the question is, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that there remains a lot of possibilities which are yet to come. I believe that if we look around us, in all that clutter that we are seeing, there's a lot of noise and clutter and chaos. If we look deep enough, there are actually new possibilities. And if we can declutter the noise and focus on the possibilities, there's just so much that we can do to empower our stakeholders, our community, our lives, and our relationships. And so I think it's important that as Axians, we guide our friends, our children, to declutter the noise, but with depth and finesse. Provide clarity, provide options, viable solutions, alternative perspectives, but not label, judge, or tear down ideas, right? I think that is something that we are seeing has been permeating for decades now. And we actually have been holding ourselves back because we've been stuck in that way. We feel that that's a natural defense mechanism. But if we're curious and we develop an awareness, and even for me, I've developed so much awareness in my 3 years of entrepreneurial journey. I started with Z's, I started with a single intervention program. Today, I am adaptable to my clients, but I make sure that my clients are of the same mind because it takes two to tango. So if they're not of the same mind, I'm happy to say, look, we don't share the same levels of curiosity to look for possibilities. And I'm not here to patch a wound. I'm here to help you build new muscles.
So it was very nice having you.